lives that really can make America better. I support Mr. Davis's amendment in the funding for the Second Chance program. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the last word, and I'll be brief. Early
recognized for 5 minutes.
Early on in the career of the gentleman from Chicago, I flew out to Chicago early one morning to meet with a whole host of people he had convened as he was developing the concept for this bill. I think the entire country is appreciative and has benefited from the work of Danny Davis and Bobby Scott on the Second Chance Act, and I was one of the original co-sponsors. It's a very significant statement. The chairman's right when he says that he's one of the biggest supporters of this effort. There's a confluence of energy around reentry from the most conservative sides of the political spectrum and the most liberal. We all realize that some 90+% of the people who are incarcerated are coming home, and the only question becomes is, are they going to come home in a position not to further victimize and end up being reincarcerated. This is an important effort. This is a program that's probably one of less than a dozen in this bill that has gotten an increase in this bill, and the Senate is significantly lower with a higher allocation. I guess preachers preach to the choir when only the choir shows up at church on a Sunday, but I think the point's been made. The use of the program that we want to cut the money from is probably not one that we would support at the end of the day because it's also needed. But I think the spirit of this amendment will be reflected in our conference deliberations. I thank you and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I ask for the yeas or nays on that, please.
Does the gentleman ask for a recorded vote?
I ask for a recorded vote, yes, thank you.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois will be postponed. Does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk. Move to strike the last word.
Where is she speaking? She's in. The reading has not yet.
Reading has not yet progressed. The clerk will read.
Page 48, line 4, Juvenile Justice Programs, $209,500,000.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
That would be me. Okay.
For what purpose?
For what purpose does the gentlewoman rise?
I have an amendment at the desk. And I move to strike the last word.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Wasserman Schultz of Florida, page 48, line 20. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $30 million, increased by $30 million. Page 49, line 4. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $30 million, increased by $30 million.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to ask for my colleagues' support for an amendment to protect our most vulnerable constituents, our children. This bipartisan amendment is a simple one. It says that child victims of sexual predators should not be forced to fight for funding scraps if deep cuts to the Department of Justice occur. This amendment fences off $30 million within the Department of Justice's Juvenile Justice Missing and Exploited Children Programs account for Internet Crimes Against Children task forces. It ensures that even in this time of painful budget cuts, that we will protect the most precious and most vulnerable among us. Over the last decade, child pornography trafficking has exploded into a multi-billion-dollar global industry. The majority of both demand and supply is based in the United States, and sadly most often involves parents or adults that the victim knows and trusts. Tragically, the demand for images of young children being sexually exploited, raped, even tortured can only be supplied through the continued sexual abuse of more children. Literally every image of child pornography is a crime scene photo. Several years ago, law enforcement informed Congress that it could identify hundreds of thousands of individuals perpetrating child exploitation offenses online, but admitted and acknowledged that it was investigating fewer than 2% of these known individuals because of a lack of resources that left them outnumbered and overwhelmed. The vast majority of these identifiable sexual predators remained at large, and their young victims beyond rescue. Congress and the President responded by passing and signing into law the Protect Our Children Act, which provides desperately needed resources for the vital Internet Crimes Against Children task forces. These task forces are teams of local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies and prosecutors that lift the digital fingerprints, rescue the children, and hold perpetrators accountable. The ICAC task forces rescue child victims in real time. Victims like Alicia Kosakavich, who was sexually assaulted at age 13 by a man who befriended her online and abducted her from her Pittsburgh home. She was rescued by the FBI and the Virginia ICAC task force. Congress is already funding this effort at only half of its authorization, but the law is making a difference. So please join Congressman Schuler, Judiciary Chairman Lamar Smith, and me in supporting this important amendment that will give state, local, and federal law enforcement the resources they need to protect our most vulnerable. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Purpose is the gentleman from Virginia rise.
Strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I support the amendment. We accept the amendment. The Internet Crimes Against Children program is one of several programs funded under the Missing and Exploited Children Activities Account. This program helps state and local enforcement agencies develop an effective response to cyber enticement and child pornography cases. So I commend the gentlelady, and we accept it and yield back.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized. For what purpose does he rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
In assuming this role for my caucus, the first visit I made was to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children over in Virginia. This work is very, very important that the gentlelady from Florida has pointed out because of the pervasiveness of the Internet and the need for more resources. So the Senate bill has a carve-out of some $21 million. This would be a carve-out of 30. I rise to say that I also support this amendment, and I thank the chairman for his agreement.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Madam Chair, I rise to move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I had submitted an amendment which I was going to move and withdraw. Instead of adding complication, I'll just discuss the amendment that I would have introduced and try to be right to the point. My colleague Raul Grijalva and I, and there were several members of the Congress, are concerned about the impact of the Stop, Shoot, and First Laws amendment. And that's what we call it, because we're concerned about these Shoot First amendments. This amendment would have encouraged states to repeal Shoot First laws by imposing a 20% penalty on on the burn jag grants for states with these laws. The Shoot First laws make our country less safe, undermine our criminal justice system, and encourage vigilantism. These laws allow armed individuals to confront unarmed people in public and in some cases, tragic cases, even shoot them in cases where such a confrontation could have been avoided. 10 years ago, state Shoot First laws were basically unknown. Then groups like the National Rifle Association and the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, began promoting Shoot First laws in states around the country. ALEC is an organization that ghostwrites bills for state legislators who hold a certain political perspective, and their efforts have paid for, by and large, by global corporations that spread in states across the country. In 2005, ALEC and the NRA convinced Florida to pass the first Shoot First law, and since then they have convinced 23 more states to enact similar laws. The Shoot First laws are unnecessary. Americans already have the right to self-defense. Even more, as Trayvon Martin case has tragically highlighted, Shoot First laws make it harder for law enforcement to do their job. Despite what was a clear case for trial, George Zimmerman's statement that he had shot in self-defense was enough to prevent prosecution. Shoot First laws make prosecutions harder because they presume that the use of deadly force is reasonable and put the burden of proof on a prosecutor. With Shoot First laws, individuals need only claim that they believe that they were threatened, and the only person who can dispute that is the person who was killed. These laws also make our states less safe. After Florida enacted its law, a number of justifiable homicide cases in the state per year increased by 3 times. While I urge states to repeal these laws, I understand that a point of order lies or could have lied against the amendment, and therefore I won't offer it in order to have it withdrawn. But I would like to say, Madam Chair, that these Shoot First laws are not good. I wish we could take an approach similar to the .08 law, where the federal government would simply enact would actually withhold financial funds until states complied with .08. .08 actually made our country safer on the roads, and I think repeal of these Shoot First laws would do the same. I wish I could offer this amendment today, but we'll do it some other time at a more appropriate place, and with that I yield back.
The clerk will read. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
The gentleman moves to strike the last word.
The gentleman moves to strike the last word. The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise to strike the last word and in support of the amendment that's pending. And I would also like to respond to what my colleague from Minnesota, Congressman Ellison, spoke about in terms of the amendment that he was going to offer, which he decided not to offer, but it would have imposed a 20% penalty to burn JAG grants for states with Shoot First laws. Shoot First laws, also known as Stand Your Ground laws. In 2005, Florida passed the first state law explicitly expanding an armed person's right to use deadly force against an unarmed person in, quote, any place where he has a right to be, end quote, even if the confrontation could be safely avoided. Florida's law, like so many similar laws in other states, was the result of collusion by some of the nation's wealthiest corporations, along with the National Rifle Association, through a secretive organization called the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. ALEC promotes model legislation written by its corporate members and disseminated to conservative state lawmakers around the country. In fact, about 60% of all state legislators are members of ALEC. And the Florida Stand Your Ground law was written by an NRA lobbyist. After the law passed in 2005, the NRA presented the bill to ALEC's Criminal Justice Task Force and boasted that the presentation was well received. The corporations and state legislators on the task force voted unanimously to approve the bill as an ALEC model, and as a result, more guns are being sold. Now, 24 states have similar sweeping laws like Florida. Membership fees are not public, but reports do show that the NRA was a co-chair of ALEC's a recent seminar that they published or that they held. And this is a group that will do anything to help corporate sponsors accomplish their legislative objectives regardless of the value that it has towards the regular citizens. They're just interested in profits. And so ALEC, along with NRA, has supported these shoot-to-kill laws, and there's something that needs to be avoided. And so with that, I will end my remarks and ask for passage of the pending amendment.
For what purposes, the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the last word. Obviously, we're dealing
The
with
gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
we're dealing with some fairly sensitive matters in terms of the Justice Department appropriations, and there's an ongoing case somewhat related to, and I think directly related to, the spirit of the comments of the last two gentlemen. So I don't want to comment on the actual case at hand, but I think that there's a great deal of concern in many sections of the country about what the circumstances are under which a shooting and a killing can take place when you have an unarmed teenager who is so this is an issue that is being handled in our court of laws. We are a country of laws, and we need to let the judicial process take its appropriate course. But I thank the two gentlemen for offering their points of view and for withdrawing the amendment. Thank you.
The clerk will read.
Page 49, line 21, Public Safety Officer Benefits, $16,300,000. Community-Oriented Policing Services, Community-Oriented Policing Services Programs, $72,500,000.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Graham of New York, page 50, line 25. After the dollar amount, insert increase by $126 million. Page 51, line 12. After the dollar amount, insert increase by $126 million. Page 65, line 1. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $126 million.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I rise today to offer a truly bipartisan amendment with my good friends and Representatives Pierluisi, King, and Pascrell. This amendment is to fund the highly successful COPS hiring program at the fiscal year 2012 level. This will ensure that we have sufficient police officers on our streets to prevent and to respond to crime and to keep our neighborhoods safe. Our local police departments count on the COPS hiring program to help them hire additional officers to combat crime in our local communities and to provide true community policing. The money to fund the COPS hiring program comes from reducing, in a corresponding amount, the appropriation for cross-agency support within NASA, an approach that was adopted by the House in the February 2011 during consideration of that. Although we do not in any way oppose the work of NASA that is funded through this offsetting account, we are determined to offer a budget-neutral amendment and to give the House an opportunity to work for robust funding for COPS in an eventual conference with the Senate. In this tough economic time, our officers understand the need for sacrifices and for cutbacks. However, during these trying times, we often see increases in crime. Therefore, I feel, and my colleagues agree, that it's essential that law enforcement agencies across the nation have the necessary resources to protect the American people. I encourage strong support for the Grimm, Pierluisi, King, Pascrell amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Puerto Rico rise? The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, along with my colleagues, Mr. Green, a former FBI agent, Mr. Pasquale, the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus, and Mr. King, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, I'm offering this bipartisan amendment to increase funding for the COPS hiring program in order to bring such funding in line with fiscal year 2012 enacted level of $166 million. The base bill provides only $40 million for this program, which is clearly not sufficient. $40 million is $122 million below the fiscal year 2012 enacted level, over $217 million below the President's request, and $175 million below the amount proposed by the Senate companion bill. The COPS program was created by Title I of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. I was Attorney General of Puerto Rico at the time, and I'm proud to have worked with my fellow AGs to help secure passage of that bill. As someone whose own family has been deeply touched by violent crime and who has spent countless hours talking with families that have been similarly affected, I am unyielding in my belief that the most solemn duty of government is to safeguard its citizens. Whether you live in Staten Island, South Orange, or San Juan, you deserve to feel safe in your home and in your community. The COPS program is rooted in this simple premise and has done much to make it a reality. The mission of the COPS program is to enhance the security of our citizens. Under the program, the federal government awards grants to state and local law enforcement agencies so they can hire and train police officers, purchase and use new crime-fighting technologies, and develop innovative policing strategies. To date, over $160 million in COPS grants have been awarded to law enforcement agencies in Puerto Rico, which unfortunately has the highest homicide rate in the country. These grants have put more than 3,500 new police officers on Puerto Rico's streets. Over $6 million have gone to improve safety for students and teachers in the island schools, and about $9 million have been awarded for crime-fighting technology. Nearly every one of Puerto Rico's 78 municipalities has benefited from COPS grants. Each of my colleagues could no doubt cite similar statistics, but even these numbers cannot adequately capture the impact that COPS funding has had in the communities we represent. The numbers of lives saved, the numbers of crimes prevented, and the numbers of families spared the pain of losing a loved one, these numbers are simply beyond calculation. To increase funding for the COPS hiring program by $122 million, our amendment reduces funding for the NASA cross-agency support account by an equivalent amount. In the fiscal year 2010 cycle, the House, in a strong bipartisan support vote of 228 to 203, adopted an amendment that followed this same approach. I respectfully urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan amendment, which is supported by the International Brotherhood of Police Officers, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to the amendment. The cross-agency support account is not free money. It's not a place that you can just, I think they ought to change the name. Cross-agency support. That's like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It's kind of cheap grace. You can just kind of go someplace and kind of get some money there because it's just a cross-agency support account. Why don't we want to cut this cross-agency support account? Because NASA will not be able to absorb this. They will literally not be able to absorb this. This deals with safety, it deals with security and the mission success. Cybersecurity measures to fend off relentless attacks by China and others, while NASA is a civil agency, much of its technology has military applications. But let's get it from the cross-agency support account. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. Yes, it does. It is a very important function with regard to NASA. Human spaceflight safety oversight. It comes partly out of that. We have learned from the hard way on the Challenger and the Columbia tragedies that relentless attention to safety is necessary. Cuts to this account will hamstring NASA's efforts to minimize the risk of loss of life and property. But hey, let's go to the agency support account. It doesn't mean anything because nobody cares, but yet it does. It's validation of mission-critical software, medical support services to keep astronauts and ground crew workers healthy. Many NASA employees work regularly with regard to hazardous issues. Procurement support. This account is a question of a lot of jobs. I can go on and on and on. I urge, you know, if you wanted to kind of find it, maybe you should have gone some other place. But to take it out of NASA and to put a spear right at NASA's heart, I think it's a mistake. So I urge, if you want to be for this, and my father was a Philadelphia policeman, city of Philadelphia, 21 years. You want to be for this? Fine. I think you should have found another spot, and we would have been trying to work with you once we get to conference, because the Senate was the $781 million up. But I'll tell you, if you care about NASA, well, maybe they don't care about NASA. So if you don't care about NASA, I urge a strong support for this. If you do care about NASA, I urge you to reject the amendment. Yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Madam Chair, I move to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair, and I rise in support of this amendment, of which I am a co-sponsor. Over the last several years, we've watched the majority attempt to eliminate, and actually eliminate, at least temporarily, the most successful crime-fighting program in the last 20 years, the Community-Oriented Policing Services, or COPS program. Since this program's creation under President Clinton, it has literally put tens of thousands of police on the beat around the nation. And it has promoted sensitive, effective policing across America. The benefits are real. Crime rates in every category decreased as a result of this program. And when this program is gutted, communities feel the effects directly and immediately. The committee should have found the money to keep the COPS program strong, but evidently they gave it lower importance, which is why we are here with this amendment. Last fall, the city of Trenton was forced to lay off nearly a third of its uniformed officers. Nearly a third. It's been reported that our state's capital now has the same number of police on its rolls as it did in 1932. The city had hoped to soften the blow of the budget-driven layoffs through a COPS grant that would have allowed Trenton to hire back at least 18 officers. But unfortunately, because this Congress failed to properly fund the COPS program, Trenton got no money to hire the laid-off officers. And the people of Trenton are paying the price in a very real way. Last year, something on the order of 150 people were shot within the city. More than twice, way more than twice the previous year. Street robberies, aggravated assaults, burglaries, up alarmingly. And people in the community tell me these trends are continuing to this day. We need more money to rehire more police. We need it now, before more Trentonians and other Americans lose their lives or suffer injury and property loss. Now, I support NASA. I don't like the offset that we're using for this. But we can't allow the COPS program to wither. I wish the committee had funded this program as it should be funded, with enough money to meet the legitimate needs of Trenton and other municipalities around America. Every time I talk with law enforcement officials, I ask, how great is the need? How much can you actually do? And every time they tell me, the need vastly exceeds the resources. And with the resources, they could do a better job. This past grant cycle, the COPS office received $2 billion in requests for assistance from around the country, $2 billion, but they only had about $200 million on hand. That's unacceptable. Crime doesn't take a holiday. We need to fully fund the COPS program in order to beat back violent crime around America, to make cities more livable, to make America the place where we all want to live. My hope is that we'll be able to meet that goal during the appropriations conference process, because the subcommittee didn't do it, which is why we're here now. This amendment is a step in that direction, and I thank my colleague, Representative Pascrell, Representative Grimm, Representative Reichert, who I believe is not here tonight, and the other sponsors for their strong, who's unable to be here tonight, I mean, and the other sponsors for their strong leadership in this effort. And I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back any time.
Back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I must say, Chairman Wolf, you've always been a sensitive person. I don't say this to blow smoke. I really mean this. And it's a tough decision when you have to make priorities. And we come to the floor to fight for what we believe in. And I think you respect that. And I'm sure the gentleman from Staten Island respects that as well, and we all do here. My good friend from Philadelphia, Congressman Fattah. We'd like to do all of these things and more. But not only did we run out of applications, think about that. People, we said, stop, don't apply any longer. We got 12,000 cops laid off, police officers in this country. Tell me that doesn't have consequences. Tell me, what are those consequences? Smaller warrant squads. Last 2 police officers killed in North Jersey, killed by 2 guys on the lam. We now have enough people to go look for them. That's not acceptable in a society which depends upon law and order. So you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth about law and order. We need police on the streets. This is about community policing. And I would say to my good friend from Virginia, these are 2 programs, and tonight we're speaking about one of the police, cops program, and the Fire Act. Leader Hoyer could tell us about that. But they're 2 bills that are run, no other bills are run better in the federal government. I think we would want to duplicate that. Having provided a huge cut in the past, from $166 million all the way down to $40 million, we can't do that with 11,000 and 12,000 police officers laid off. Our amendment would restore the program. Of course, this is really just a drop in the bucket because it only really hires close to 1,000 police officers. We've already laid off 12,000. And a lot of positions have not been filled. There was nobody in it there was no one in that position to begin with. So, look, the program, the account that we're talking about in NASA, I think is $2.8 billion. This is a small part of it. I would rather do it some other way, Mr. Chairman, through this speaker. I would rather do it another way. My hometown laid off 125 police officers. Same story in other towns in New Jersey. Fewer cops on the beat means more crime on our streets, plain and simple. If I can't come up here and fight for the guys and gals who defend us day in and day out, and if there is an attack, be it a natural disaster or some man-made disaster, it's the police and the firefighters and EMTs are going to be there long before the federal government. We need to protect them. Sure, I yield.
But gentlemen, yeah, my dad was a policeman in the city of Philadelphia. Actually, you know, with my dad, I couldn't say the word cops because it was a derogatory term. My dad was a policeman, and I love my father. And when we go to conference, we will attempt to really deal with this, and I think Mr. Fattah and I agree. NASA is not the place to go. I'm very sympathetic. We're given a budget that many of these guys, some guys over on our side want to take the budget down even more. The Republican Study Committee wants to take it down even more. I mean, will some guys who voted for the Republican Study Committee come down here and then be for this? I mean, that's, so listen, I am committed and to do everything we can when we go to conference. The allocation was different. The Senate, if I can,
the gentleman from New Jersey would continue to yield.
But I would say, just let me say, I would do everything we can as we go to conference, depending on how the allocation is, to see what we can to really do, because I want to do everything we can.
Chairman, it cannot be dependent upon the allocation. We've got to fight for the allocation. We've got to fight for what we want. That's what I'm saying. Yes, I yield.
Now, I'll let you conclude your time. I'll
Thank
skip
you.
my own time.
I just have a few more things to say. I want us all to listen on both sides of the aisle. what is dragging down the economy at this section, at this point, when you look at it objectively, if you try to look at it objectively, is that we have lost between 600 and 700,000 public sector jobs. So we are adding private sector jobs, even though we only added 116,000 last year. And we've got to do a little bit better than that so we can catch up for people that are coming into the market and defend and go after those people who want to drop out and become phantoms, and then they don't exist at all on the numbers. That doesn't help us either. But we got to stop this trend down to the bottom. We're losing teachers, police officers, and firefighters at an unprecedented rate. And if you think that's going to solve our problems nationally or locally, I don't think that that's the route to go. And I yield back. I urge a yes vote on the amendment. Thank you.
I strike the last word.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I strike the last word. And
the gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Join the chairman in saying that there are two things that are going to happen when this bill becomes the law of the land. There are going to be additional dollars for cops, and the NASA's not going to be cut. So I understand that the makers of the amendment have to find an offset. It's an offset that's not going to be acceptable when we come to a final resolution on this bill. But it does, you need an offset to come to the floor, and you came to the floor to make a point that needs to be made, which is that we need to have, when people call 911, there needs to be a cavalry on the way, and not just a hope that there might be some help. So we thank you for bringing the amendment forward. When we finalize this bill, there will be additional dollars for the COPS program. Thank you.
Yields back.
Yes.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The gentleman from New York. The gentleman from New York. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York will be postponed. The clerk will read.
Page 51, line 23, General Provisions, Department of Justice, Section 201. In addition to amounts made available, $50,000 shall be available to the Attorney General for official reception. Section 202. None of the funds shall be available to pay for an abortion except where the life of the mother would be endangered. Section 203. None of the funds shall be used to require any person to perform an abortion. Section 204. Nothing in the preceding section shall remove the obligation to provide escort services necessary for a female inmate to receive such service. Section 205. Not to exceed 5% of any appropriations for the Department may be transferred between such appropriations, but no such appropriation shall be increased by more than 10%. Section 206. The Attorney General is authorized to extend through September 30, 2014, the demonstration project transferred to the Attorney General pursuant to Public Law 107-296.
Madam Chair.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady.
Daniel, page 53, line 15.
Madam Chair, over 2 decades ago, the first President Bush signed into law the Bipartisan and Historic Americans with Disabilities Act. I was proud to sponsor that legislation and have worked over the last 20 years to make sure that it was effective and strengthened. Contained in the bill before us is an unprecedented measure that would significantly erode the Justice Department's authority to protect access for those with disabilities to swimming pools. Now, one might say access to swimming pools, but I want my colleagues to think about if you have a mobility impairment, if you have some neurological impairment, that swimming is one of the most effective activities in which you can participate to get your motor skills back in an environment that will not allow you to sink. Therefore, you have an environment in which you can exercise your muscles. So many of you have seen that and know that to be the case. This is an incredibly important, accessible facility for those with disabilities. And in any event, those with disabilities ought to have access, certainly to public facilities, and we can make it so. Now, I'm not going to offer an amendment to strike this language, but I hope, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, that this will be struck. And I hope that we will listen to the literally tens of letters that I've gotten and you've gotten, and I want to, Madam Chair, ask unanimous consent to include in the record at this time.
The gentleman's request will be covered by general leave.
Thank you very much. For many Americans with disabilities, swimming pools are an important source of physical activity and emotional comfort. The provisions in question would roll back the Justice Department's 2010 accessibility regulations, undermining standards for new pool construction and for upgrading of existing facilities. This would constitute a serious setback to Americans with disabilities, including many of our veterans, and I want you to think about this. Many of our veterans wounded while serving in nation overseas. And as all of you know, many of these injuries they received are to their limbs. Again, in a swimming pool supported by water, it is much, it facilitates their exercise program. This would constitute, as I said, a serious setback. The 2010 accessibility regulations this provision would eliminate do not place an undue burden on pool operators who cannot afford to make their facilities. Some of you will remember Steve Bartlett, member of this Congress, mayor of Dallas, still in town, a wonderful friend of mine, a conservative Republican from Texas. He and I spent literally hundreds of hours working on this legislation together. And one of the things we did was to make sure that businesses would know that what they were asked to do was affordable and that they could do it with relative ease, realizing full well that one can't expect a small business in particular to incur a large expense, notwithstanding the objective is a worthy one. So we had a practical approach to this. And we had language that said it had to be readily achievable and affordable for the enterprise. Certainly, we can continue to do that for these facilities, which are so important to so many people with disabilities. I hope, Mr. Chairman, my good friend, Mr. Wolf, and I want to say Mr. Wolf is one of the most conscientious members of this House and one of the most courageous members of this House, and he and I have had the opportunity to work together for over 3 decades on legislation. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, that House and Senate conferees will look carefully at the damage this provision will cause in the lives of so many Americans with disabilities and strike it from the final version. I commend my colleagues who have come here to draw attention to it, and I thank them for continuing to stand up for those with disabilities, including veterans, and their right to equal access and opportunity. When George Bush signed in July 26, 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, he said it was the most significant civil rights act in over a quarter of a century since the 60s. He said it ensured that all individuals would have access to full enjoyment of facilities in this country of opportunity and of freedom. This amendment may be well intended, but its effect would be very detrimental. Again, I urge the chairman and the ranking member, and I will certainly be working with my Senate colleagues as well in making sure this language is not in the final bill, because this would be detrimental. And as I remind you once again, so many veterans are coming back in need of this kind of access. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. And to the gentleman's point, the minority whip, I think all of us want to protect the ADA and the goals of the ADA. That's why this amendment was offered in the committee to strike this language. What will happen, I think we can all see it, is if these new regulations are allowed to go into effect, At the end of this month, I believe it will come. There isn't the equipment even available to put it in use. The liability issues are so huge. To have a stanchion basically with a lift at every pool and a power source right by the water, in every body of water. If there's a resort with 10 pools, 10 lifts, 3 jacuzzis, 3 more lifts. If it's an apartment complex with a small little pool, they still have to do it. Municipalities that have public pools will have to do that as well. And what will happen is too many of them will say, we can't expose ourselves to the cost or the liability, and so we'll simply close our pool. What does that do for access for the disabled, whether they be military or anyone else? What good is it if a pool is closed down because the owners simply can't deal with the costs or the liability? I guarantee you, if this happens, if this goes into effect, and then if it isn't, then you're just granting waivers based on some kind of spoil system, or whether or not they think they can afford it. It's just not workable. What we need is a workable regulation. I'm told by many of the resort owners that they had already purchased, and some already have. I will for a very brief time.
Is the gentleman aware that if the equipment is not ready, then under the law it is not readily achievable, and that and doesn't have to be done at that point, and that the DOJ has already met with the industry and told them this?
It's all well and good to say that. It's all well and good to say that, but what these owners will say is their liability comes as soon as the lawyer walks by and the pool doesn't have it. They're not going to risk having the liability. They're not going to risk doing that, and so you'll have less access because it's simply not ready. Having this go into effect less than a month from now, at the end of this month, is simply not reasonable. And what we're about is trying to find a solution that is reasonable and affordable that will increase accessibility for the disabled. This doesn't do it. That's why the amendment was offered in the committee as a whole, or the committee, to take this back and have something reasonable. All of us want the same goal here, but the regulations as they're put forward are not reasonable. Think about that for a minute. A small apartment complex that has a pool open to the public, to impose that kind of cost and liability on them, is, even if the equipment, when it does become available, it's more likely that they will simply shut the pool down because they won't want to deal with that liability. We have resorts in Arizona who have had portable lifts available for years and years. Some of them inform us that they've never been asked once or one time in 10 years. There are ways to do this. It's reasonable and prudent to say you ought to have a portable lift available, but a fixed stanchion or a lift for every body of water, it just is unreasonable and too costly. So that's why the amendment was offered. That's why the language is in this bill, and I would urge that it be retained. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5
We had this discussion in full committee. You have on one side the Paralyzed Veterans Association, the blind veterans, every veterans group you can imagine. And on the other side, you have hotel owners who say, look, we either can't afford it, or nobody will ever want to use it, or we can't get the equipment. What we have in the middle is a set of facts, which is that this regulation has been developed over a long period of process, since starting back in 2004, and that if you have a financial hardship and you can't do it, you can waive it. If the equipment is not available, it's not achievable. There's tax credits for it. The issue here really is whether there's enough heart among the hotel owners to make sure that Americans who are disabled have the same opportunity. That's the real question here. So we don't have a vote on this. There's no amendment pending. I just want the House to be clear that one of the reasons why you don't authorize on an appropriation bill is that this is a matter for the Judiciary Committee. They've held a hearing on it. There's a set of facts that get kind of bottled up when we're dealing with this spending of dollars. But there's no reason here for a country as big as ours, as wealthy as ours, to have so little heart and compassion for those who are less fortunate, who are disabled, so that they can have access as they travel and deal with public accommodations. Thank you, and I yield back to my remaining time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This measure is not about undermining the Americans with Disability Act. This measure is not about denying access. If it was, I would be part of leading the charge to defend that access in the Americans with Disability Act. Because when I was in college, I lost my eyesight. When I graduated from college, I was blind. I've been denied a job because of my blindness. I would defend every person's right to access, and I would defend the Americans with Disability Act. But this proposal is about finding a reasonable solution to a problem rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all dictate from the bureaucracy in Washington. There seems to be a serious disconnect between the people that are writing the regulations and those that have to comply with them. Portable lifts accomplish the same access, and they're much easier to install and can be installed at lower cost. These fixed lifts are much more costly to install, and the net effect is that hotels and municipalities will simply close their swimming pool rather than comply with this new regulation. Many hotels have already begun to comply by ordering portable lifts, making those available, but that money and effort will be wasted because the Department of Justice has decided that only fixed lifts will meet the regulation. The problem here is that the bureaucrats who don't have to live with the consequences of the rules they write really don't care how much it costs the small business owners. They just want to tell other people what to do, no matter what the real-world consequences are. Our goal is not to deny access. It's to find a reasonable way for businesses to comply with this new regulation in a fair and reasonable manner, in a cost-effective manner that will ensure access to every American. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak against an amendment added during committee markup of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill, the one that we've been talking about, that would prevent the Department of Justice from enforcing regulations regarding access to swimming pools under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Since passage of the ADA in 1990, Congress has never acted to weaken the ADA's promise of increased opportunity and access for our neighbors, friends, family, and colleagues with disabilities. Today, however, this House is poised to strip the Justice Department of its ability to enforce certain accessibility rules. We are at this unfortunate and unwarranted juncture because of an aggressive advertising and lobbying campaign that misrepresents what the ADA is and what the Department of Justice rules require. Congress should not roll back reasonable, balanced, and negotiated civil rights standards that have long enjoyed strong bipartisan support based on an alarming misunderstanding and misrepresentation of the ADA and Department of Justice regulations. Nor should we override a nearly decade-long regulatory process that began under the administration of President George W. Bush and concluded after extensive public notice and comment by adopting the guidelines that the United States Access Board developed in 2004 during the George W. Bush administration. Certain members of the hotel industry and their lawyers have claimed that the Department of Justice rules require all pool owners to install fixed lifts in every pool, that this is costly and burdensome, and that owners who cannot afford to install lifts will have to shut down their pools or face civil penalties. These claims are simply false. As required by Congress when it passed the ADA in 1990, the Justice Department has now issued rules to increase access to newly constructed and existing swimming pools, rules that have been under development for almost 15 years. New pools must be built with either a sloped entry into the pool or a pool lift under these new rules. For existing pools, owners will have to do what is, quote, readily achievable, unquote, based on the size and resources of the owner's business and the prospective cost of the improvement. If it is readily achievable, which is defined in the ADA as, quote, easily accomplishable and able to be carried out without much difficulty or expense, close quote, a business should take the same steps to improve an existing pool that it would take if it were building a new pool. This means that if a fixed lift can be installed easily and inexpensively, it should be. If installing a fixed lift is too expensive or difficult, it is not legally required. The law does not impose one-size-fits-all requirements. The law is quite flexible. Now, fixed lifts are superior to portable lifts because a fixed lift provides a safer and more independent means of getting in and out of a pool for a person with disability. A fixed lift is available whenever a pool is open without the need for staff to locate the lift, ensure it's in proper operating condition, and provide timely and safe installation while the disabled person waits. This allows a person with a disability to swim whenever a pool is open, just like everybody else. While those pushing this amendment have raised concerns about lift safety, the United States Access Board has found no evidence of increased safety risks from pool lifts. The same measures already in place at a hotel's pool, such as prohibiting unsupervised children from using a pool, should prevent misuse of a pool lift as for other pool equipment like diving boards, slides, deck chairs, or tables. This unnecessary amendment will harm countless Americans and veterans who rely upon the ADA, and we have heard from a number of organizations and individuals who oppose legislation prohibiting DOJ from enforcing its regulations. I would like to include some of the letters and testimony sent to the House Judiciary Committee's Constitution Subcommittee, where I serve as ranking member, along with my statement in the record. Opposition comes from organizations that work with opposition to the amendment, that is, comes from organizations that work with a broad spectrum of persons with disabilities, including the National Center for Independent Living, the Association of University Centers and Disabilities, the American Association of Peoples with Disabilities, and National Disabilities Rights Network, to name a few. A father and swim coach in Georgia wrote that swimming has helped his son, a medalist at the Athens and Beijing Paralympics, make friends, earn respect, achieve goals, and make the best of his disability. A dozen veterans organizations wrote similarly of the benefit of rehabilitation and recreational opportunities for wounded and disabled veterans and service members. These Americans have paid a high price in service to their country. They should be able to account upon the ADA to ensure equality and opportunity here at home. Before today, our commitment to the ADA was a shared one. It would be unfortunate if that were to change under Republican leadership in the House. I call upon my colleagues to ensure that this ill-advised amendment is not included in any bill sent to the President for his signature. These regulations, which have not yet been imposed, which the Justice Department has said may be postponed another few months if necessary, are in the spirit of the ADA. They are proper, they are well considered, and they oughtn't to be set aside by lobbyist-driven legislation, amendments. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I rise in opposition because I know what it's like to live with and travel with a disabled person. My brother-in-law, very distinguished retired lawyer who actually was injured in a diving accident and is paralyzed from the waist down. I never fully had an appreciation for ADA until I started living with him and realized, as he said, that the ADA was not a zoning ordinance about construction. The ADA is a civil right that this Congress enacted, a civil right. 22 years ago, this Congress enacted it. It was remarkable legislation. And to govern that legislation, we have an access board who are not made up, as someone said, of bureaucrats, but they're made up of citizens who are appointed, some by the President, I guess all by the President. And I've watched, because my brother-in-law was appointed to that board under President Clinton. I've watched that board as they go through all kinds of issues dealing with people with disabilities, very conscientiously, thorough hearings, lots of discussions about how to implement it. And I'm just shocked that Congress would think that we ought to take away an access. I'm sure these same debates were given when people said, well, we shouldn't do curb cuts. They cost money. and there's nobody standing on that curb that needs it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, curb cuts make a big difference, not just for people that are disabled, but just for elderly people who can't be that lift. And by the way, you and I are all, as my friends like to say, temporarily able-bodied persons, because you never know when you're going to be in the next accident. So I think that statements were made are right on this side, that there's a lot of misinformation going on about these proposed regulations. I represent the Tourism Caucus. I'm the chair of in the bipartisan caucus on tourism. And yeah, a lot of my hotelers have come in and said you can't do this. But you know what? There's an exemption in there for small hotels for whom the pool lift is too expensive for them to buy it. They're exempted. The regulation also allows hotelers to do either a permanent or portable. There's a lot of discussion here that this is all portable, it's mandatory. By the way, the disabled community is a big traveling community. There's a lot of money in that community. And I'll just give a kudo, because one of the hotels that's very conscientious about this and has a reputation for being extremely well suited for disabilities is the Four Seasons Hotel. That is not a cheap hotel. So there are conscientious hotelers out there that want to reach this market. There are people that want to get access, and we should never, never take away something that is so essential to quality of life. Indeed, I think our role here is to protect the domestic tranquility of this country, and a lot of that domestic tranquility is people with disabilities, including many of our soldiers. So I'll yield back, but I want to make sure that we defeat this amendment.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I